if adding anything means more embodied carbon, how do we not add anything? And that's where we started to think about circularity. Can we salvage material that's already on site? If we have to have something new, can we find things that are kind of second use, remanufactured, or, can be salvaged from elsewhere? And that's where circularity came from because we had success there, but we realized the infrastructure for circularity in the building industry is not there.
The seemingly benign act of curiosity actually has a very bold undercurrent. It has the power to conquer fear, challenge the status quo, propel innovation, and cultivate solutions. Curiosity is what drove Albert Einstein to revolutionize modern physics, and Walt Disney to produce the first feature length animated film, which forever changed the industry. And curiosity is what led interior designer Jenn Chen, a former partner at LMN Architects, deep into the world of circularity and understanding the carbon impact of cyclical interior renovations. Through her exploration of new design possibilities that could serve people and planet, Jenn co-created the firm's Path to Zero Carbon series, developed foundational research in interior design's role in lowering embodied carbon, and has inspired countless others in the industry to get curious about carbon and circularity.
I'm someone who has been interested in sustainability kind of early on before I even realized I wanted to be an interior designer. I actually have a fine arts degree. And the last quarter of my last year in college, I decided I wanted to do installation art because I wanted kind of my art to be experiential. But at the same time, I also took a class in sustainable business practices. And in my head, I combined the two into interior design, sustainable interior design, mostly because installation art felt too temporary and I wanted something with a little bit more that's a little bit more longer lasting. And then from there, I went into the workforce, not first in interior design, but more in retail planning and design, and joined kind of the local USGBC chapter, and that's where it opened a lot more of my knowledge and understanding in sustainability. Then I finally actually got a degree in in interior design, and then when I started practicing, sustainability has never left my mind. So with everything that I do, I try to understand what I can add into my practice from a sustainability standpoint.
Jenn then went on to join the Green Team at LMN, where she dove into learning as much as she could about operational and embodied carbon. That then prompted her to consider how she could use her role as an interior designer to mitigate some of the carbon impact of the built environment. And that led her to circularity.
When I started to question what the impact is for embodied carbon from a interior design standpoint, as an interior designer was my role and what I can do. We quickly formed a small team where we talked about that on a regular basis, and our sustainability director pulled together a team to put together our Path to Zero Carbon series, which is a series of white paper around carbon and strategies for carbon reduction.
That Path to Zero Carbon is really such a great read. It's so in depth and informative, and
Mhm.
I can't imagine the amount of hours that went into that.
Thinking back, it didn't feel like a lot of work. It was just something that we were all super like, okay, we're interested in this, we need to figure it out. And it didn't feel like extra work. That's what happens when you're curious about something and want to figure it out yourself.
So when did you start getting curious about circularity?
We did our initial study for the cyclical renovation impact, which could rival, in our study at least, structure and envelope combined over a 60-year lifespan for a building. Um, so that led to me proposing, hey, let's try to do a zero carbon interior project for the next small TI project we received. Um, we quickly found out zero carbon interiors is not possible because we needed to back up our claim without offsets or biogenic material accounting. Because everything we add to the project has embodied carbon involved, obviously. So anything that we need to do to get it down to zero, we have to use offsets, which, in our Path to Zero Carbon series, it's problematic. And I know a lot of people are moving away from offsets. They're still good, when that's the only option you can do. But we then from there decided, if adding anything means more embodied carbon, how do we not add anything? And that's where we started to think about circularity. Can we salvage material that's already on site? If we have to have something new, can we find things that are kind of second use, remanufactured, um, or can be salvaged from elsewhere? And that's where circularity came from, because we had success there, but we realized the infrastructure for circularity in the building industry is not there. You can find sort of interesting ways to do things, but it's very niche. It's not like, oh, I want 6 options for, reused furniture. Let me easily find those um, in a way that they would fit my project, or the design aesthetics or the functions that we need. So that was my interest into circularity. We were able to, do great things on that project to achieve 65% uh, carbon reduction, embodied carbon reduction. But there are more things that I wish I could have done that I just didn't know where to source the materials, or there were the next project, which we wanted to scale up what we can do, and realizing that is pretty difficult to scale up. So I'm focused on kind of the design process, what I can do in my part of the design and building process. But beyond that, also very interested in connecting with people and figuring out how I can overcome some of the challenges that I met. Mostly coming from where to source the material. How do I make sure I know the performance criteria for the materials, and then timing and storage? That's a big issue as well for circularity.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about some of those challenges too, but
Hmm.
I actually read something where you defined circularity, and I thought it was such a great definition. So, how do you define circularity?
The word is being used in a way that even describes recycled material. And for me, that's not true circularity. It helps. But it's basically things that still can be used without having to go through the recycle process. In the building industry, a lot of things are thrown away prematurely, like especially furniture goes through cycles so much, but there's not great infrastructure. I mean, better than I expected, actually. But generally, people aren't aware of what you do with furniture should you not know where it can go next. And in the design world, not very many designers think about second use furniture as their primary design resource. So for me, circularity is extending the life of something to make sure it lives out its useful life and not throwing away prematurely. And recycling is a concept to address the excess material coming into the marketplace, in my opinion, because people don't know what to do with it at the end of it. It doesn't become nutrient for something. It doesn't become the same material with the same material integrity a lot of times. Most man-made things downcycle instead of truly recycle. So in my opinion, circularity, that's kind of low run strategy for circularity. And this is actually in our Path to Zero Carbon on, I believe, post 9 on circularity, where it says, what do we mean by circularity? And actually has tiers of circularity defined. So things that you can use and salvage as is on site is probably top tier circularity.
That post is so I'll definitely link to it because it's so informative and really gets you to think about uh, I guess just those different levels of circularity, but also how
Yeah.
you can start to infuse it into the
Yeah.
design process.
Yeah. And that's the biggest part, to actually put it into practice. And I think it really could change how we think about design and the building process if people um, feel like this is what we need in the industry. It takes everyone to sort of do at least one thing to get it started and to connect that. I keep saying it feels like there's an unconnected network of people doing really cool things in circularity, but right now the whole infrastructure network is not connected. So, but it takes more people. It's kind of like making new neurons. I feel like you need more people to make that connection, and then it'll work easier the next time.
On that note, why do you think it's so important for designers to consider the circularity route versus always sourcing new, even if they are low carbon materials or quote unquote recycled content materials?
Well, from a technical standpoint, that project we did, the Heinz headquarters project, we did a simulation for the carbon reduction we could have achieved with best in class low carbon material at the time of the project. And we would have only been able to achieve a 22% reduction versus a 65. And that's a big difference. And a lot of that comes from the extraction of raw materials and the processing. So if you can eliminate that, you're eliminating a huge chunk of embodied carbon. From a technical level, that is why I think it's important. But on the other hand, I also feel like we put so much work into our design and we put so much thinking into our design to create a great environment, for the people that use it. As an interior designer, I would hate to put something together just to take it out by someone else in a short amount of time, and not because, I want my project to last forever. I mean, I know things shift, culture shift, functional needs shifts, but it's more a way of thinking beyond sort of our project scope and thinking about the lifespan of your project and the extended ecosystem, or just any system out there that is also involved with every decision we make. So thinking beyond kind of your immediate project scope and how it ties into the bigger picture, for me, feels rewarding when I can think of it that way, that I'm having impact maybe beyond the immediate people that it's serving. And that's the hope anyway. You know, I can't say that that is what all my projects do, but it's the aim that makes me feel like I'm being a responsible designer.
When you think about all of the energy and the different hands that even touched one material,
Okay.
it's kind of sad to think that, in a few years it just ends up in the landfill.
Yeah. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit at the regarding the rewritten showroom at Neocon. But I was talking to one of the pioneers, Rose Trejour of Anew, about how she got started because she was way ahead of her time in terms of trying to connect used furniture with nonprofits and making sure things don't end up in the landfill. And she said she was on a job site where she saw people throw literally beautiful, very new furniture, just push them off the edge of the building into a dumpster because that was what needed to happen for her to make way for the next project. And she was like, that image is seared into my brain of what we're doing with these resources. And so, everyone sort of has their spark moment where they're like, wait, what are we doing? And yeah, I think once you get that spark, then you're thinking, okay, I have to change how I practice.
I think it is just like you said, everyone kind of has that moment when you see that it really
Mhm.
kind of hits home, I think, for most people. So how does LMN approach circularity and kind of incorporate it into the design process?
We do on a lot of our projects, if it is a renovation, a salvage walkthrough. So if we are moving into a space, we're hoping to be able to get into that space first without it sort of getting white boxed and looking at what could potentially be reused in place. And we're having conversations a lot more with our client in terms of salvaged or reclaimed options for materials. For example, we're actually talking to a client hoping to write into the furniture package RFP to include a certain amount of reused furniture, just to make sure that when they're sourcing furniture, or when we're sourcing furniture for them, that we have written into the contract that we need to have a certain amount of reused material. On some of our bigger projects, we're also doing something to the extent of reusing major trusses. Storage becomes a big question, but this requires, um, a strong partnership with your contractors early on, and they are also on board with the process. And really, I think the important part is to document the potential impact. It becomes a great communication tool with the client, with other stakeholders, just to say, hey, if we make this decision, this is what sort of impact you're looking at, what sort of carbon savings you might be looking at. And what we found on the Heinz project is that regular conversation with the client, keeping these things on top of mind, people start to get really excited and they are like, oh, what do we do this week? What were you able to find? I mean, on the Heinz project, at some point, the client even went out to look for reused furniture themselves, because they're like, oh, yeah, we could do that. Why didn't we? And sometimes it is just that. It's a, why didn't we think of doing that?
I imagine it seems like there can be some negative perceptions around reuse. Have you encountered that with clients, or have you had to deal with any kind of pushback of not wanting to use reused furniture?
It was interesting. We had, and this is not a project that I am working on, but I hear that the client, the stakeholder group or steering committee group was very interested, very excited about it. But when it went to the user groups, there was a perception of, oh, I'm moving into a new building, but I'm getting all hand me down furniture. Why would I want that? Um, and if they're an important, stakeholder, the steering committee might then back off and say, yes, you'll get all new furniture. Don't worry, Um, but I think there is a perception of, I think I recently read an article, the ick factor. That is true. That there could be that feeling. Like sometimes when you think about old furniture, it feels like there's years of grime on it. I don't know who's touched it, but there are ways to clean things up. Um, and really, recycling is just a version where you clean it so much that you can't see what it is anymore. So, um, recycle content and circularity, there are ways to make circularity more attractive. And sometimes they're just speaking more about furniture. There are manufacturers, refinishers, refurbishers that are out there that not only is making something look new again, they can also customize it to your needs specifically. That it might be an upcharge from, um, a original producer, manufacturer. And a lot of times they can reupholster a chair, for example. They will do the cleaning and then reupholster a chair. So, especially for better quality material or products out there, you're able to kind of renew it. So it's more just new to you. It's not like it's old and icky stuff. And I think sometimes people just don't know where to source the material. And especially for those, I would say refurbishers or remanufacturers, they also extend certain warranties with their products. So sometimes that is another thing where people are worried about. If I'm taking something that someone's already used, does that mean I just have no warranty? If it fails, I'm on my own. Um, and that's where I was talking about the infrastructure is not fully connected. There are people out there that is making sure that the product that goes back out is as good as new. Um, but on the other hand, there are also marketplaces that make it seem like somebody just has leftover building material or like things that they tore down, don't know what to do with, and they put it on um, a marketplace. But people are like, well, I can't use this in my project from a commercial standpoint. So there are still kind of barriers in that sense, but generally, I think it comes down to kind of the creativity of the designer of like, how can you convince the client of something that I've heard the term storied materials. Like, what does this material tell a story? And usually when it's talked about it that way, there's a romantic kind of feeling behind it. And I've also heard the term, I'm using a lot of terms that lately I've been hearing and thinking, okay, this is all part of circularity, but the idea of blended design, you can have old and new come together to feel like a space, but it's grounded in kind of history and story. behind it, but in a new and refreshing way. So to me, it's an exciting design challenge. And when you think about it that way, and as a designer, you're excited about it that way, then you're able to kind of tell that story to the client and they get excited. Like I said, for the Heinz project, they all got super interested. It wasn't like, oh, I'm getting offcuts. Why am I getting this, material that's headed to the incinerator? It was like, oh, this can create a feature wall. Great. Let me they came in and helped us build the feature wall. So they had part of that story. It's the whole process and the whole kind of let's design together with something interesting and new and make it new.
And there is so much story embedded in circularity, not only from the history that furniture or that material had, but then also it's kind of writing that, if it's a company,
Hmm.
writing their story too about how now their redesign has a more, I guess, impactful story to it
Hmm.
versus we just went out and sourced all new furniture.
Hmm.
Now they have this story of we went and found this thing at this place and here's the story
Yeah.
behind it, and then also that they care about the planet.
It's a great story all around, no
Yeah.
matter what. Yeah.
Along those same lines, what other challenges do you have to overcome when it comes to infusing circularity into a project?
I think the biggest challenge I see right now is timing and storage for the materials. I think it's easier for shorter term projects that are built within a year, but LMN tends to work on large complex projects that if I'm designing now, the project might not be done with construction for at least 3 years. And that makes it difficult because if we want to design and convince the client, here's what your design is going to look like. This is what we're testing recently is can we hold certain things to say these aren't design critical elements and we're going to try to maximize reuse for these things. But then these other things, we might not know exactly what you're going to get in 3 years. It depends on what's available then. Even if we find something now, like we would love to lock in our design right now and say, okay, these materials we will use in 3 years. We run into the issue of where do we store it? Um, is it still going to be in the right condition? Who's going to make sure at that time it's cleaned and the warranty exists? That's again the whole infrastructure not quite set up for this yet. Um, and I know there are efforts of people like on the East Coast, they're trying to buy warehouses up and down, but some materials need to be in conditioned spaces, some don't. That's the barrier that I see is when is the material available? How can it be stored and who's responsible for making sure it's available and stored properly. Sometimes you have a project that's large enough that you can just have on-site storage, hopefully, and is fine. And others, you just literally cannot access that material, and you have to be comfortable with and be able to convince the client for 2 years of this 3 year process, you're not going to know what this actually is. And then they have to sign off on the design. And, so that's kind of, I guess that's another thing that we are doing is trying to identify what are design critical elements that we have to lock in now and what are things that we can potentially source later and still not kind of impact the design negatively. It takes a little bit more coordination and thinking, but from a design standpoint, that is kind of a big challenge right now.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly not as easy as, choosing from a catalog
Yeah.
of products and materials. I did want to ask you too about how you go about specifying things, and you kind of answered this, but what are some ways that your team has gone about specifying circular products and materials?
The project that I'm working on right now that has this is early in the design process. So what we are doing is keeping a log of reuse potential products that could potentially be reused or be sourced from a reuse resource. This is something we're exploring too. We're trying to, with every phase of the project, there's cost estimation. It ends up being costed as everything is new. with an idea and a log for every phase that this section of materials will be sourced, reused. And we're in conversations with potential reuse resources for that. But again, it's not anything that we can lock down immediately. For the Heinz project, it was really more niche and hyper local at the time. For example, we had a small amount of new carpet that was needed, but instead of buying new, we found a flooring distributor locally that had excess material from past projects. So that was something that we were able to specify, but it was such a small amount. Um, and not in a design critical area that the client was fine with it, and actually they thought it was great because they were able to save some money. But the specification process is definitely not traditional. You can put as much performance criteria as you can to it, to try to make sure you get what you want, but it's really depending on what is out there and whether you think it's viable or not. um, that part is definitely not streamlined. It's very opportunistic right now, and that's something that we're trying to create more neural pathways to in this whole network to kind of make it more obvious. From all of these processes, we have people that we know that are playing this realm, and every now and then we just put a blast out there and say who has such and such, and hopefully, it gets connected that way.
I was going to ask you if you have any, um, at this point, kind of go to tools like Reaply, or do you go to a local reuse center or things like that?
Some of the online marketplaces are currently still a challenge, depending on how much material they actually have and whether or not they can warranty it. And a lot of times when we design, we need to be able to give samples to our clients, and it's a little bit hard to get someone to send you a tile out of, 300 square feet of tile that they have, and you might not want it in the end. So there's not a good incentive for them. So right now, I think for small things, yes, we can find it in reuse centers. But I think mostly what I'm trying to connect with are people that are doing this at scale on a business standpoint, and not sort of opportunistic scenarios where people say, well, I now have this many sheets of JIP and I'm trying to get rid of it, but more people that are doing it at scale, kind of like, I would say, like furniture remanufacturers out there, or, doors unhinged. Like those are kind of trusted places where you can go to get what you need rather than finding it on a marketplace, which is a little harder for a commercial um, design process just because the quantity and the timing of things is a little different. So um there are maps out there that sort of tells you who's doing what and who has what, but in terms of sourcing material, it's still a barrier, a challenge.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And but I'm glad you mentioned like Doors Unhinged, and then yeah, I know all for reuse.org has a really great map.
And there are contractors out there that kind of specifically are interested in this, and they're building their network. So it's for all the people that are kind of fully invested in this space to create that network and to kind of amplify what each other is doing is definitely helpful.
Certainly sounds like some good business opportunities for anyone who is able to crack
For
some of the
sure.
codes on these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So much is moving towards whole building life cycle analysis, and of course using EPDs, which are
Mhm.
great. But
Mhm.
do you think that, I guess even just specifically in terms of circularity, that maybe we're too reliant on those things?
I feel like I have an unpopular opinion. I think transparency is necessary in terms of prompting primary producers to know what impact they're making and be more intentional about it. But as a designer, it's hard to rely on EPDs because one, it's very hard to compare them apples to apples. There are tools out there like EC3 that's supposed to equalize some of that data, but they don't have everything under the sun captured. and it's impossible. And I often say, as an interior designer, we're dealing with so many different finished materials that if I'm really to compare every product, first, there's not enough EPDs for everything. And I know that's the kind of the push for more EPDs out there. Um, but even if I have these, I'm not necessarily going to be able to make the better choice. And from my Heinz kind of experience, I realized that even if I find the best low in class material using EPD comparison, it's probably better if I could find a reused, remanufactured product. Um, so I'm not super reliant on it. I do use it when we do have new materials as necessary and there are abundant EPD data out there. Um, Otherwise, my primary kind of concern is can I find something that's circular? Can I find a salvaged or a reclaimed material? Just because I know no matter what, it's going to have lowered embodied carbon compared to even the lowest embodied carbon new material as stressed by an EPD. So I think it's necessary in terms of understanding the producer's impact and what they're doing behind it and making everyone a bit more intentional um, about how they're manufacturing and addressing that. But considering we're 5 years away from 2030, I think the fastest way, without waiting for the data to be available all across every single material that an interior designer might come across, is to find circular projects or products.
Agreed. Yeah. Do you, as far as I know, with LCAs, with whole building life cycle analysis, that there's no way to put in circular materials or products, is there?
I know people are thinking about circularity in some of the certifications out there, but not, I think, currently with EPDs. I know, Cradle to Cradle has different levels, and now they have a circularity certificate, I believe. But yeah, I don't think it's fully captured currently. I know there are definitely efforts ongoing.
Yeah, there's a group, I think through Build Reuse, that is working on EPDs for
Circular
circular.
products, yeah, or
Yeah,
products.
yeah,
Yeah, I have heard of that. That's right. Yeah, I'm super interested to see what comes out of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It I don't know how they would begin to do it, but if they do it, that's amazing.
Yeah, sounds like a great effort.
Jumping back to the design process, when you're um, integrating circularity, do you specify how maybe certain materials are installed so that they can easily, like, when it comes time for the next renovation or redesign, that they can um, be more easily dismantled and reused?
There was a period where we were trying to look through all of our install details, kind of typical details to say which ones can we use universal fasteners or decoupling processes. Things like instead of using full glue down for carpets, we use the kind of the carpet dots as a baseline for installation. There are things like let's let's use this material or let's not inset this material into the floor or depress the slab if we don't need to for more flexibility later. So there are some conversations like that, a design lens where we do think about for the longevity of something, is there a better way to install or can we eliminate some additional components? Or it's not super robust, I would say, but it is something that we think about as we're designing.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider for
Yeah.
sure. When it comes to interiors, are there certain categories that are bigger contributors to carbon than others?
The biggest one is furniture. If you're talking about sort of objects or things that would go into an interior design. Um, but if it's things that, there's often this line where if you turn a building upside down, you shake it, what will fall out? So furniture is a big thing. It has the shorter life cycle, but high embodied carbon. attached to it, and it is something that is often thrown away before it really is broken or cannot be used anymore. But otherwise, large embodied carbon contributors are flooring, like carpet is a big one, ceiling, kind of your general lay-in ceiling could be a big one. But really, I would say it's all the bits and pieces. There's just so many materials that interior designers have access to that it's the accumulation of everything together that can be considered. But it is easier to kind of focus on large materials, but really kind of all the rest of the stuff could add up too.
On that note, I guess for interior designers that are who are wanting to get started in maybe trying to think about how to infuse circularity into their projects, is there a place you recommend for them to start?
The process that I was talking about recently, where as we're designing, we're saying, what is critical? What do I really need to look like something or to do something versus what can I have flexibility on and consider um, starting with a limited palette of only sourcing from reuse. Um, I think even just that exercise is interesting because you're starting to think about what are the things that I'm putting in there just because I'm putting in there versus the things that are really making the design, what I intend it to be. Um, and then from there, I think talking to a lot of your local, talking to your contractor, looking for people that are playing in the circularity realm, asking, what do you have? It's more investigative in the beginning to kind of see what's possible based on your design. That as an exercise is what we did for Heinz, and it connected us to so many different people doing different things that we just didn't even realize were putting an effort in this area. And I think that's the interesting part. I'm still constantly excited by a conversation that I just randomly get into with somebody who's like, "Oh, well, I've been working on this." And I'm like, "I wish I had known that 3 years ago because I would have done my project differently for this product." Um, so to get started is to think about your design process and see how you can integrate circularity in a way that makes sense to you. And then just talk to as many people as you can who are interested in this, and you'll start finding like a larger network of people that could then help you in your future projects. Designers are demand. There's a lot of supply out there. A lot of people have excess material. They have demo stock that they're trying to figure out where to go. It takes the demand side to kind of complete the circle. So all the designers have the power to kind of make that complete circle. So that's where we, as a designer, when you think through your design process and when you um, try to find these connections and say, hey, even go to your primary product producers and say, I'm looking for, I love your chair, but do you have any reuse possibilities? Some of the producers actually have done things like I took a bunch of chairs back and we reupholstered it and give it back to the client. Um, so there are possibilities out there that is to be uncovered.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of an exciting prospect too. It's I guess you just have to get curious and not be
Yeah.
afraid to ask some of
Yeah,
the
just ask, and manufacturers will get that message that the industry is interested in this and they need to get in on it.
yeah, and what you mentioned too about, them having offcuts and things that um I imagine there's much more of that than we realize and rather
Mhm.
than it being sent to a landfill or even a recycling facility
Yeah.
um which requires energy and power
Mhm.
that they might be happy for to have a designer take it off their hands.
Oh, yeah. I was doing research on general lifespan of landfills in the United States. And I know in the Northeast, and this is confirmed in a conversation um, with people that actually deal with landfills, that in general, we're looking at about 20 to 30-year lifespan. With some places, saying that their landfills will not be operational beyond 2030 because it would be at capacity. And to me, that is scary to think about. Like, where are we going to send the amount of materials that we're throwing away each year if landfills are full? Like, where do we create new landfills? um, so for me, that's kind of the primary goal is how do we not send materials prematurely to the landfills because it is also a finite, you know, resource, if you can call it that.
That's scary to think about. That's
Yeah. I mean, they were saying like, well, yeah, we're looking into expanding vertically just to address this, but it would only gain us like 2 or 3 years. That's going to be the case in many places. Things are going to get a lot more expensive to throw away because of limited availability and capacity for landfill. So the time to start mitigating is now to make sure we can extend the life of also landfills that really we should not have anything go if possible.
wow, going vertically. I can't even imagine what.
What that looks like? No,
Yeah.
I don't know how that works. Definitely not, but all I know is I can try to attempt to throw less things away.
Yes. Yeah. It's I interviewed Simona Fisher. I know you were on the
Mhm,
panel with her.
mhm,
Um and one thing she mentioned was when it comes to reuse and circularity to start with what you have, and it
mhm.
started making me look at things so much differently,
Yeah,
and how quick we are to like, oh, I don't need this thing anymore, I'll get rid of it or give it
yeah,
away,
yeah,
recycle it, but maybe there's another use for it, or can it be
yeah,
repainted or worked into something else? And
right. Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's an opportunity. I mean, if we thought about all of the things we've already produced as raw resources, what can we do with these things as a new product? Um, like I said, that's exciting to think about, and it definitely a market and a potential to be explored there.
yeah, I think it engages the designer brain in a different way.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. It's a
Yeah.
design challenge. I mean, this is a design challenge.
Yes, on
Yeah,
so many levels. See,
yeah.
with the Heinz project, is there anything in particular that you were really excited about that you were able to reuse or that was a circular item?
I think the most fun one is the keeping the existing carpet in place. Just because it was something that I had never thought about, but I thought, what if we could reuse this existing carpet? And that we were ultimately able to is still kind of like, oh, how did that how did we manage to pull this off? But we went into the project. The existing space had carpet that hasn't been down for more than 4 or 5 years, and this was just before the pandemic, so it has barely been used. The design itself is fairly neutral, and I thought, okay, maybe we could reuse this carpet and just keep it in place. So I pulled a piece off just to see if I can work it into a pellet. And then when we went back to um, present our pellet, um, the client didn't realize it was the same carpet. Even though at first they didn't think they liked the carpet and that should be the first thing to go. So we were able to put that back into the project. And for me, that was something that I think before this investigation, I would have never considered. And now it's like, okay, I can, this is the blended design idea. I can work this into a new project. And obviously, if that carpet was not as neutral and versatile as it can be, I would not have. There's definitely other projects where I walk in and I was like, there's nothing I can do with this carpet that it needs to come out. Um, but it's seeing opportunities like that and like what you said earlier, seeing things differently and say, maybe I can do something with this. That was a moment where I was like, okay, this is the designer's role to be able to make something like this happen. And so that was exciting to me. There are definitely other things like the wood offcuts, creating the feature wall, and um using salvage wood for our reception desk and benches and things like that. But I think this one was just more interesting because it's just something that I've never thought about doing before.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too that when the client saw it mixed kind of on that design palette with other things, how it made them look at it in a new light.
differently. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I didn't get
Mhm.
to go, but
Uh-huh.
I had major FOMO. But I saw some little clips of your rewritten exhibit at NeoCon.
Mhm.
What was that all about?
John Strassner, a sustainability consultant, reached out to me. We were on a sustainability committee together a few years ago, where he had the idea of creating a showroom focused on reuse and circularity. And I partnered with him essentially as kind of the curator and the exhibit designer in a way, um, of curating this sort of journey of what circularity is, why we need to care about it, who are some of the players doing some things about it, um, and then examples of case studies or efforts that people have done to try to kind of get the design community to understand why this is important, a call to action, and also helping them sort of start with the first step of here's some examples that has been done before and here's how you can think about it. um so it was a lot of people kind of in this circularity realm, a lot of them from the furniture remanufacture refurbishing side, but also other um, manufacturers with take back programs, or there are sustainable or circular decommissioning um, groups. So we put them all under one exhibit, and it was about them exemplifying principles of circularity in the built environment. That was the main idea of the exhibit overall. And it was basically a self guided tour for people to be able to walk through at Neocon and, you know, maybe consider why we're talking about this and your impact and what you can do.
Will it live on anywhere else, or was it just for NeoCon?
Um, it was funny because when we first started, it was just for Neocon. It's like, that's one idea, let's put it together. We had such good feedback from those that participated, where there is a desire for this to live on elsewhere. So it won't be the last that you see rewritten, but we're trying to figure out what it means now that the message out there, and how we can kind of continue the conversation and facilitate the conversation in the industry. So more to come.